Book 2, The Lands of California. Stave 3. The Pueblo of San Francisco. For the injuries that these Mexican grants have done to California, the Mexican land policy is not responsible. That merely furnished the pretext under cover of which our policy has fostered land monopolization. What of the Mexican policy was bad under our different conditions, we have made infinitely worse. What would still have been good, we have discarded. The same colonization laws under which these great grants were made gave 4 square leagues to each town in which to provide homes for its inhabitants, the only conditions being good character and occupancy. The American city of San Francisco, as the successor of the Mexican Pueblo, came into a heritage such as no great city of modern times has enjoyed. Land enough for a city as large as London, dedicated to the purpose of providing every family with a free homestead. Here was an opportunity to build up a great city, in which tenement houses and blind alleys would be unknown, in which there would be less poverty, suffering, crime, and social and political corruption than in any city of our time, of equal numbers. This magnificent opportunity has been thrown, and with the exception of a great sandbank, the worst could be found, reserved for a part, and a few squares reserved for public buildings. The heritage of all the people of San Francisco has been divided among a few hundred. Of the successive steps culminating in the United States law of 1866, by which this was accomplished, of the battles of land grabbers to take and to keep, and of the municipal corruption engendered, it is not worthwhile here to speak. The deed is done. We have made a few millionaires, and now the citizens of San Francisco who need a home must pay a hefty sum for permission to build it on land dedicated to its use, before the American flag had been raised in California. The Railroad Grants of California. The grants made to railroads of public lands in the state of California are the grant to the Western Pacific and Central Pacific of 10 alternate sections on each side per mile, 12,800 acres, made to half that amount in 1862 and doubled in 1864. The grants to the Southern Pacific and to the California and Oregon of 10 alternate sections on each side, with 10 miles on each side in which to make up deficiencies, made in 1866. The grant to the Stockton and Copperopolis of 5 alternate sections on each side, with 20 miles on each side in which to make up deficiencies, made in 1867. The grants to the Texas Pacific and the connecting branch of the Southern Pacific of 10 alternate sections on each side, with 10 miles for deficiencies, made in 1871. A grant was also made in 1866 to the Sacramento and Placerville Road, but the idea of building the road was abandoned, and the grant has lapsed. Upon the map of California, see frontispiece, the reservations for these grants are marked in red. This marking does not show the exact limits of the reservations, as they follow the rectilinear section lines, which is, of course, impossible to show on so small a scale, nor are the routes of the roads precisely drawn, but it gives a perfectly correct idea of the extent and general course of these reservations. The exhibit is absolutely startling. A commentary on the railroad land grant policy of Congress, the force of which no words can add. Observe the proportion which these reservations bear to the total area of the state, and observe at the same time the topography of California, how the railroad reservations cover nearly all the great central valleys and leave still the mountains, and you may get an idea of how these reservations are cursing the state. It is true that the companies do not get all of the land included in these reservations, nor even half of it. But for the present at least, so far as the greater part of it is concerned, they might as well get it all. Preemption or homestead settlers may still go upon the even sections, but the trouble is to find them. The greater part of this land is unsurveyed, or, having been once surveyed, the vaqueros, who share in the prejudices of their employers against settlers, have pulled up the stakes, and the settler cannot tell whether he gets on government or railroad land. If on government land, he is all right, and can get 80 acres for $22 as a homestead, or 160 acres for $400 by preemption. But it is an even chance that he is on railroad land, and if so, he is at the mercy of a corporation which will make with him no terms in advance. Settlers will not take such chances. These railroad grants have worked nothing but evil to California. Though given under the pretext of aiding settlement, they have really retarded it. Of all the roads ever subsidized in the United States, the Central Pacific is the one to which the giving of a subsidy is the most defensible. But so large was the subsidy, in money and bonds, that the road could have been built, and would have been built, just as soon without the land grant. The Western Pacific Land Grant became the property of a single individual who did nothing towards building the road. The company that did build the road, the Central, bought the franchise minus the land grant. The Southern Pacific Land Grant has actually postponed the building of a road southward through California, and had the grant never been made, it is certain that an unsubsidized road would already have been running farther into Southern California than the land grant road yet does. Of the California and Oregon land grants, the same thing may be said. The Stockton and Copperopolis grant was made in 1867, but the building of the road has only commenced this year, and it is exceedingly probable that had this land been open to settlers, the business, actual and prospective, would by this time have offered sufficient inducements for the building of the road. All these land grants, with the exception perhaps of that from the eastern boundary to San Diego, and with the exception of the Western Pacific Grant, are owned by a single firm who also own all the railroads in California, having bought what they did not build. It is generally argued that when land grants are made, it is to the interest of the companies to sell their lands cheaply, because settlement will bring them business. But the land grant companies of California seem in no hurry to sell their lands, preferring to wait for the greater promise of the future. Neither the Southern Pacific nor the California and Oregon will make any terms with settlers until their lands are surveyed and listed over to them. It is, of course, to their interest to have the government sections settled first, and to reserve their own land for higher prices after the government land is gone. The Central Pacific advertises to sell good farming land for $2.50 per acre. Still, when one goes to buy good farming land for that price, he finds that it has been sold to the Sacramento Land Company. This convenient corporation stands to the company in its land business just as the contract and finance company did in the building of the road. Private entry and scrip locations. Large bodies of the public lands of California were offered at public sale long before there was any demand for them. When the failure of placer mining directed industry towards agriculture, and the beginnings of the railroad system led to hopes of a large immigration, these lands were gobbled up by a few large speculators by the 100,000 acres. The larger part of the available portion of the great San Joaquin Valley went in this way, and the process has gone on from Siskiyou on the north to San Diego on the south. According to a common report, the speculators have received every facility in the land offices, while the poor settler who wanted a farm would have to trudge off to look at the land himself. The speculator or his agent had all the information which could be furnished. Land which had never been sold or applied for would be marked on the maps as taken, in order to keep it from settlers and reserve it for speculators. In some cases, it is even said that settlers selecting land and going to the land office to apply for it would be put off for a few minutes, while the land they wanted would be taken up on behalf of the speculator. Then they would be referred to him if they desired to purchase. A great deal of this land has been located with the agricultural college scrip of eastern states, bought by the speculators at an average of about 50 cents per acre in greenbacks, when greenbacks were low, and sold or held at prices varying from $4 to $20 per acre in gold. Whole townships have been taken up at once in this way, but the law was amended in 1867, so that only 3 sections in the same township can now be located with this scrip. The agricultural scrip of California has been sold at about $5 per acre, having special privileges. The act of last year, making this California scrip locatable on unsurveyed land, within railroad reservations, etc., is a good sample of the recklessness of congressional legislation on land matters. It is so loosely drawn that by the purchase of 40 acres, a speculator can tie up a whole township. The land agent of the university has only to give notice to the United States Register that he has an application for land, without specifying amount or locality, in a certain township, and the Register must hold the plats of survey for 60 days after their return. Should a preemptor go on before this time, there is nothing to prevent the speculator from swooping down upon him and asserting that his farm is the particular piece of ground he wanted. Happily, nearly all this scrip will be used for locating timberland, for which the scrip of other states is not available, as it can only be located on surveyed land, and the surveyed timberland has long since been taken up. Besides the agricultural scrip, a large amount of half-breed scrip has been located by speculators. This scrip was issued to Indians in lieu of their lands, and was made by law locatable only by the Indians themselves. Though the speculators pretended to locate as the attorneys of the Indians, the location was illegal. However, it was made, and patents have been issued. In this way, millions of acres in California have been monopolized by a handful of men. The chief of these speculators now holds some 350,000 acres. In contrast, thousands and thousands of acres which he located with scrip or paid $1.25 per acre for have been sold to settlers at rates varying from $5 to $20 per acre, the settlers paying cash enough to clear him and leave a balance, and then giving a mortgage for and paying interest on the remainder. And a large quantity of his land is rented, cultivators furnishing everything and paying the landlord 1/4 of their crop. And as has been the case in all the methods of land monopolization in California, these scrip locations have been used not only to grab unoccupied lands, but to rob actual settlers of their improved farms. In one instance, a large scrip speculator got a tool of his appointed to make the survey of a tract of land in one of the southern counties, which had been long occupied by actual settlers. This deputy surveyor persuaded the settlers that it would be cheaper for them to get a state title to their lands than to file preemption claims, and they accordingly proceeded to do this. But as the clock struck 9, and the doors of the land office in San Francisco were thrown open on the morning the plats were filed, another agent of the speculator entered with an armful of scrip, which he proceeded to plaster over the settlers' farms.